The silent ward. Danny woke to the sound of distant screams. His eyes snapped open, but the room around him was dark, cold, and unfamiliar. The air smelled sterile, with a faint scent of bleach that stung his nose. He was lying in a narrow bed, his wrists strapped down with rough leather belts. Panic surged through him, but when he tried to scream, his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. His throat felt raw, like he had been screaming for hours. The last thing he remembered was the accident. His parents arguing in the car, his head pounding from the noise. Then the screeching of tires and the sound of metal crunching. He had woken up in a hospital bed after that, but something was wrong. The doctors looked at him strangely, their eyes cold, distant, as if he were an insect under a microscope. And then they sent him here. He didn't know where here was. Some kind of mental hospital, they said. He wasn't crazy, though. He knew he wasn't crazy, but no one believed him. They kept talking about the accident, how it had shattered his mind. That's what the doctor called it. As Danny's eyes adjusted to the dark, he noticed something. His door was slightly ajar. The faintest sliver of light crept in from the hallway, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He tried to sit up, but the straps held him down. His breath quickened, chest tightening with fear. Suddenly, he heard footsteps. Soft, almost like someone was tiptoeing outside his room. They stopped right at his door. The silence was deafening, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall, gaunt, and dressed in a hospital gown. Its face was shrouded in shadow, but its eyes glinted with a cold, unnatural light. Danny's heart raced, and he struggled against the straps, trying to break free, but it was no use. The figure took a step forward, the sound of its bare feet slapping against the tile floor echoing in the room. "Help! Me?" Danny croaked. But the figure said nothing. It stepped closer, and as it came into the light, Danny could see it more clearly. The figure wasn't human. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, its eyes sunken deep into its skull, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. It opened its mouth, but instead of words, a low, gurgling sound came out, a sound like someone drowning. Terror gripped Danny. He yanked harder at the straps, desperate to free himself, but they held firm. The figure reached out a bony hand, fingers long and thin, like claws. As its hand hovered over Danny's face, the lights in the room flickered, casting the figure in and out of shadow. Then, just as the lights went out completely, the figure leaned down close to his ear and whispered in a voice like scraping metal, "You shouldn't be here." When the lights flickered back on, the figure was gone. The room was empty again, but the door remained open, swaying slightly on its hinges. Danny lay still, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He knew he had to get out of this place. Something wasn't right here. With all his strength, he wrenched his arm free of the strap. His skin burned as the leather dug into his flesh, but he didn't care. He had to escape. Once his arms were free, he tore off the straps around his legs and stumbled out of bed, his legs weak and shaky beneath him. The hallway outside his room stretched out like a tunnel, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The walls were cracked, peeling, and lined with old, rusted doors. As he stepped into the hallway, the air grew colder. A chill ran down his spine. There were no nurses, no doctors, not even patients. It was as if the hospital had been abandoned, but he could still hear the faint echoes of footsteps in the distance. He moved quickly, trying to find an exit, any way out. But every door he opened led to another empty, decaying room. The corridors seemed to twist and turn, leading him deeper into the hospital, though he swore he had been walking in a straight line. The lights above him flickered again, and in the moment of darkness, he heard a voice, a whisper that echoed down the halls. "Danny." He froze. That voice. It sounded familiar. Slowly, he turned around, but there was nothing behind him. Only shadows. Then the voice came again, louder this time. "Danny." It was his mother's voice. He hadn't heard it since the accident. His heart leaped into his throat as he spun around, searching for the source. "Mom?" he called out, his voice trembling. But the only response was the soft hum of the flickering lights. Suddenly, the walls around him began to warp, bending and twisting like they were alive. The floor beneath his feet shifted, pulling him deeper into the hospital. He stumbled, trying to keep his balance, but the ground was like quicksand, dragging him down. From the corner of his eye, he saw them. Shadows creeping along the walls, their forms shifting and distorting. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were figures, like the one that had visited his room. Dozens of them, all watching him, their hollow eyes gleaming in the darkness. "No!" Danny screamed, turning and running down the hall. The shadows followed him, their whispers filling the air. He ran faster, his feet pounding against the cold tile floor, but no matter how far he went, the shadows were always right behind him. Just as he rounded a corner, he saw it. A door. An exit sign flickered above it, casting a faint red glow. Hope surged in his chest, and he sprinted toward it, his legs burning from the effort. But just as he reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. Danny skidded to a halt, his hand grasping the doorknob. He twisted it, pulled it, shoved against the door with all his strength, but it wouldn't budge. Behind him, the whispers grew louder, the shadows closing in. And then, from the darkness, the voice came again. "You shouldn't be here, Danny." The shadows surrounded him, their cold hands reaching for him, pulling him into their endless void. As the darkness consumed him, the last thing Danny heard was the sound of his own voice, screaming for help that would never come. In the morning, when the nurses did their rounds, they found his bed empty. The straps were unbuckled, and the door to his room hung open. But Danny was gone, vanished without a trace, like so many others before him. And in the silent, decaying halls of the mental hospital, the whispers continued, waiting for the next to join them.